Good morning and greetings from the southern tip of Africa. I wonder if you spent some time under that beautiful Gemini supermoon last night. It was absolutely glorious. And I woke up this morning still very much in that energy and thinking about the themes that come up around Gemini. It's most traditionally as an astrological sign depicted by two fish that are facing in different directions. And there's a lot of wonderful symbolism around that. I think a really interesting one is, and it talks to our human condition, is the binary. As humans, we are configured in such a way that we perceive everything in binaries, by which I mean light and dark, good and bad, up and down. And then we also have a lot of social constructs that impose those binaries. For example, man and woman. In the tarot, and the major arcana in particular, Gemini is associated with the Lover's card. And so in the spirit of this Gemini full moon and the Lover's card, today the energy check-in is going to be a relational one. And by relational, I mean us and others in our lives. So the Lover's card is number 6 in the major arcana, and the Fool's journey up until that point goes something briefly like this. The Fool is 0. It's the beginning of a major spiritual cycle. It's the first spark that sets us off on a new cycle. It's followed by number 1, the Magician, where in a pre-manifest kind of way, we start to work with all the elements in order to bring into being whatever this new cycle, the core or the heart of the new cycle is. Number 2 is the High Priestess, representing the tuning in to the infinite universal energy and all the intuition and infinite insight and knowledge, higher knowledge that comes with that. Number 3, of course, is the Empress, and that is the first manifestation in the earthly domain. The Empress is sometimes associated with the archetype of Eve, Mother Earth, Gaia, and so on. Number 4 is the masculine energy of that. And between the Empress and the Emperor, we have divine feminine and divine masculine, respectively. Number 5 is the Hierophant, and that is the first codification of higher knowledge about the earthly plane. And then we get to number 6, the Lovers. And that is the first time in the Fool's journey that we have the other, our counterpart, something outside of ourselves to which we can relate, that becomes a mirror, that becomes our way of starting to understand ourselves in relation to another. So this reading is going to be quite simple today in its layout. I'm using the same decks and I'm going to use them in the same way, where the light seers tarot is more about what's in the conscious mind and what's visible to us, what's known to us, and the wild unknown tarot to look at the sort of shadow aspects, what's known, unknown, and the invisible. And in so doing, the intention is to explore the duality, the binary nature of the Gemini archetype itself, the two faces of the two fish, the two sides to the same coin. And of course, when we speak of the relational, there's the relational with the other outside of us, and there's the relational of us with us internally. All right. 8 of Wands. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have two sides, depending on where you're at. You may want to take this as you and another, and that other could be a lover, a friend, a family member, a colleague. Simultaneously, you can take it as the relational within yourself. I'm going to read for both. So let's go and let's see where we land. All right, 2 8s. So 8s is, obviously these are minor arcanas, but they're quite far along in this minor cycle. 8s is mastery. Wands, of course, are all about energy, drive, passion, ambition, motivation, movement. And swords are all about thought patterns, communication, our mental architecture, our internal narratives, our worldviews, perceptions. So let's have a look. We have the 8 of Wands on the one side and the 8 of Swords on the other. The 8 of Wands is such a gorgeous, fast-moving, energetic card. At this point in a minor cycle, we have already launched and planned and built, and then had to rest and celebrate, and then struggle again, and then leave and come back. And here we are with all that life experience around this particular area. And now we're ready to push that energy out into the world. So is this you? Is it somebody else? Is it an aspect of part of your internal duality? The 8 of Swords in the Rider-Waite traditional tarot is usually depicted by a woman, much like this one over here, who is surrounded by 8 swords in the ground. She's blindfolded and she's bound. What's quite interesting about this depiction is that there's two, in fact, this internal duality, this internal mirroring that I mentioned in the introduction, shows up so beautifully in this card. Here she is, unbound, not blindfolded, not tied up at all. However, when she sees herself in the mirror, this is what she sees. And here are all these ravens tying her up and binding her. But you'll notice with very fine strings that she could easily break free from. In the spirit of the mastery of the sword's energy, then, this represents that from a sword point of view, we've started with the Ace of Swords, a new idea, a new perspective, a new communication. And we've been through all those phases of that minor cycle of having to go inward and make inward choices, and having to come to terms in the Three of Swords with how our words or the words of others or perspectives or worldviews can genuinely break our hearts. To the resting of the Four of Swords, and then the petty competitiveness of the Five of Swords, and then the growing wisdom about leaving behind all of that immature thinking in the Six of Swords into calmer waters. And then back into the messiness of being human in the Seven of Swords and being deceptive and self-sabotaging and having false narratives, to finally reaching this mastery of the way we think about the world and the way we speak to ourselves, to others and others. And realizing that it's all an illusion, that everything from our worldview, our self-narrative, our perception of others and ourselves is all a construct. And the construct is an illusion and something that can be deconstructed very easily. And I'm referring there to these strings that tie her up in knots, basically. So to the extent that these are two different people, they are on equal levels of mastery. This person has mastered the energetic, the creative, the manifestation, energy and drive of being human and being alive in this world. This person over here has mastered words and the discipline and honesty of thinking and speaking. These are equals, both playing to their strengths. To the extent that these are two sides of an individual, of us as individuals, this is bringing into focus those parts of ourselves that are doing adulting quite well. So it's a beautiful, positive, quite calming, relational place to start. So let's see what's in the more shadow, invisible aspect, just for the moment, just for today, something for us to contemplate, as I said, internally and in relation to the other. The Emperor. And the Nine of Pentacles. Wow. If you were looking looking for something positive and something to kind of reassure you for the day, this is lovely. These are also very mature, very masterful energies. There's no messiness here, just at first glance. This is very grounding energy for a shadow energy, so let's explore. So the Emperor, as I mentioned in the introduction, is number 4 in the major arcana and is the counterpart to the Empress. The Emperor is the first earthly manifestation of the divine masculine in human form. The Emperor, depicted here also with the burning sun, is the source of the divine masculine, of creation, of the ones. And the Emperor holds within him thousands and thousands of years of ancestry and lineage and roots that go deep into the earth. I don't know if you've ever seen those depictions of the height of a tree, as you may see it, will have an even more extensive network of roots kind of mirroring it under the ground. So the bigger the tree, the more extensive the root systems. So this is an energy that is incredibly grounded, powerful, dominant. Confidence doesn't even begin to describe it. The Emperor is as solid as a rock and holds everything together. But this card is sitting in the shadow aspect. So before we look at it in relation to the Eight of Wands here, let's just contemplate for a moment the Emperor in its shadow aspect. This is very domineering. This is toxic masculinity, in which we're all implicated, by the way. Even if you identify as female, all females contain masculine energy, and to the extent that there's toxic masculinity in the world, coming as it does, the other symbolism of the Emperor in shadow is patriarchy. We all contain it regardless of what gender we are. This is domination. As I said, from a patriarchal point of view, it would be domination over women. But it's also the same kind of mentality. Really sorry about the background noise. It's also the mentality that drives and has driven colonization around the world. It's the domination of one people over other people. So let's look at them together. The Eight of Wands is often about, as I sort of intimated earlier or alluded to earlier, is now the harnessing of all this energy and drive that we have built up through hard-lived experience to a level of mastery that we're now able to fully show up in the world and move in a direction. And given that this is a relational reading, move in the direction of another. And as always, that could be in the context of a love relationship, a work partnership, a family interaction, neighbors, but also depending on who you are, it can also be in a world sense, maybe activism, fighting injustice, whatever the case might be. So the other in that context could be communities, underprivileged communities, or as we speak, populations that are suffering under genocide and so on. Whatever the case, from the micro to the macro, this is about harnessing all that energy and bringing it to bear in relation to other. But what we have to really watch out for is there's all that mastery and confidence that comes, with that mastery. But if you've got the Emperor sitting in the shadow aspect, we need to be really on the alert that we are not coming at this in a controlling, dominating, destructive kind of power. How do we manage this power in ourselves in relation to the other? One can become extremely impassioned about one's religious beliefs or political beliefs. I definitely can fall into the latter. And it's too forceful. It's just simply too forceful. Or we may be feeling tremendous passion for another human being, and it's just too much. And the effect can be that it just forces that person to run for the hills. Too much fire. On the other side, we have this beautiful Nine of Pentacles, and I say it's beautiful for a few reasons. One is, just look at this card. What's not to like about beautiful feathers and little gold discs? But on a more serious note, the nines, of course, are the completion of that minor cycle. Having mastered at the level of the 8, we then start to come to resolution for that minor cycle. And being a Pentacles card, it has to do with our material reality. And so the Nine of Pentacles is those times in our lives when we are lucky enough to be self-sufficient. And that could be in the most modest of ways, or it might be in the most opulent of ways. We all have different fates in this life. It makes me think of community as well, because self-sufficiency is not an individual thing, even though in the Nine of Pentacles, especially how it's traditionally depicted, is the individual sort of reveling in their own self-sufficiency. But similar to, along the lines of a point I made yesterday, is that we're all part of an ecology, an ecosystem, and a community, and our ability to self-sustain is dependent on others always. So that ties quite nicely into this relational theme. But now let's look at what the Nine of Pentacles is in the shadow position, and then in relation to this Eight of Swords. So the shadow side of the Nine of Pentacles is exactly that. It's self-sufficiency. It's making sure that I'm okay, Jack. And building up my own little empire and kind of hoarding it all to myself. So if you now look at this card again, those feathers are creating a kind of hoarding, a little bit like the Four of Pentacles, but much further along. Building my little empire, everything is for myself, I don't share, I don't care about anyone else around me, I am enjoying all the fruits of my labors, and to hell with everybody else. So how do we relate this to the Eight of Swords? So if we've taken this Eight of Swords in its light aspect as being mastery of the knowledge, the self-knowledge, that our thought processes, the narratives we have about ourselves and the world around us, our perceptions, our worldview, etc., are constructs that can be deconstructed at any time. This self-sufficiency energy of the Nine of Pentacles in the shadow aspect is going to create some kind of distortion of this mastery. It's in a kind of tension. It's pulling against this very delicate and very esoteric understanding by a very strong desire to grow one's empire, be materially rich, but in a very self-serving kind of way. It's going to distort and undermine this self-knowledge and this ability for us to look in the mirror and see ourselves for who we really are, and to have an honest lens on where we are deluding ourselves, because this is very delusional in the shadow aspect. We're never self-sufficient. Anything can happen. I mean, we know that. So what I see in this reading is this beautiful mastery, self-mastery, and mastery in relation to the other, here, up in the light, in the conscious space. And this very important reminder that that mastery can turn to hubris, arrogance, and very distorted self-perception and perception of the other. And it can really infect, in a very toxic way, how we relate to the other. And again, that is the other in the form of another person, but also think of it in terms of different aspects of ourselves. There's no self-doubt here at all. Just simply a question of keeping it real and not running away with ourselves or getting carried away. And to always bear in mind, even when we are at, or especially when we're at our most powerful, in a moment like today, to watch for these energies trying to tussle internally with ourselves in relation to ourselves, but also in how we relate to others. Lovely. And with that, I send you greetings, and I shall see you tomorrow.